Welcome to the Geek in Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal profession. I'm Marlene Gebauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert.
So, Happy New Year, Greg.
Happy New Year. We're only a couple weeks in. So
I know. We retired 2023. We're jumping into 2024. Did you have a nice holiday?
I did. So I got to spend my 30th wedding anniversary in Germany. We took one of those Viking river cruises, very enjoyable, a little pricey for me. You know me, I'm the cheap geek. So,
I do.
Giving up that much money, but we had a blast, and I really couldn't have asked for a better way to have spent our 30th. The crew on the ship took really good care of us, and we met some super nice people on the cruise.
That's terrific. I understood you went to the markets, so you got to go see those, and
yeah, the
that was
Christmas
fun.
markets were all open in Germany, and so we got to walk around, look at a lot of little Christmas ornaments, and little
Made
nice
of wood.
little star. Yeah, lots of stuff made of wood. And then we drank not a lot, but a sufficient amount of glue wine, which was described to me as you take wine, you heat it up, and then you put glue in it. So that's glue wine.
Ah.
I'm just repeating what I was told.
I was going to say that's a great appetizing description of it for sure. For sure. Well,
It was great.
I didn't get to go overseas, but I did get to go back to New Jersey and New York, which was tons of fun. Got to see my parents, and the kids got to see all their friends up there. And I had a wonderful spa day with some of my friends, and then I also got to go out to a concert with some friends. I got to go to Central Park and met up with some folks, and we literally walked from like Penn Station all the way up to Central Park and just walked all over Central Park. I hit a lot of places that I've never actually been to there. So I was, this many years old when I got to the Alice in Wonderland statue. So there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was quite nice, and really had a good time.
Good. Well,
Did you have any resolutions?
Well, we're already halfway through January, so you should
That's
ask.
true.
Do I have any that I've kept? I am actually doing a dry January, mostly because I did a super soaked December. So I need to dry out. But as our friend Toby Brown told me recently, is like, well, I'm doing dry January up to January 30th, but then going to Legal Week, and then we're going to be having some events at Legal Week, and really can't pass up the booze at Legal Week, right?
Yeah. True. It's free, so
You do it right.
Yeah.
It is.
No. Yeah, more resolutions just sort of to be in the present, and that's sort of mine. So that's kind of going to be an ongoing thing. It's just
How's
to
that
sort of
working so
focus on
far?
that. So
Are you in the present now?
you know me.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it's like, struggling, but working on it. I'm working on it.
Good.
So I know we're kind of into January. We took some time off, so just sort of catching up on things. But last month, went to Miami. I attended the TLTF Summit. That's a very highly curated gathering for entrepreneurs, for investors, companies, and practitioners who are creating, powering, and partnering with technology companies and transforming the world of law.
Do you want to know how curated this
I know.
is? I was
How
not
curated
invited.
is it?
I was not invited.
Oh.
That's how curated it was. Next year.
It was next year. Well, actually, it was really a great. I mean, I'd never been to a conference like this one where you just had this kind of group of people together, and I really liked that. I liked how they structured things. You had. I wouldn't say. I mean, they had like quick presentations, and then the groups, people, and it was in different categories, and then so, litigation, for example, and then people who were in the room would sort of vote on like who they thought was the best. And like overall, like who got the most points would end up in the final presentation at the end of the summit. And, you got to see all of those presenters, and you could, connect with those folks. Like if there was something where you thought, wow, that would be of interest to, my firm, then you could do that. And I mean, I know that firms brought clients. A lot of high level people from firms were there that I saw. So I thought it was fantastic. And I've come back with like, okay, I have a bunch of connections, not only to talk with on the podcast, which we will be doing. In fact, some of the people, we'll say it in a minute. So this is what this podcast is dedicated to, is the interviews that I had there, but we'll go deeper with a few of them in the future. But also, opportunities to connect with these vendors, just for purposes of checking them out for the firm. So it was cool. Yeah. But you gave me your microphones. You gave me your little microphones. By the way, I bought exactly the same ones, so now I have to give you yours back. But and I wrote MG on mine so they don't get messed up.
That way we
But
don't get confused.
that's right. That's right. Because it's so easy to get confused. But these microphones were a lifesaver. I got a lot of short interviews from many of the attendees at the summit to ask them about what they view as some of the biggest impacts that technology may have on the legal industry in the near future. And that was, again, it was just a real opportunity to sort of connect a little bit more. And a lot of people there didn't know about the podcast. And so it was also an opportunity to tell them a little bit about what we're doing, get them subscribed. So,
Yeah. How the hell do they not know about the podcast? We're awesome.
well, it's like some of these folks are they're kind of new to the legal space. This is a good thing, Greg. This is a good thing.
Okay. All right. So, well, you did a great job grabbing the people at the summit and pulling them to the side. But I have to say, as the audio engineer of this podcast, I didn't really think through how well the recordings were going to sound when you're in a packed room with people and everyone else is talking at the same time. So I did a bit of cleanup on them as best I could. Some of the voices, in order to kind of remove enough of the background to hear them, may sound a little off to the listeners, and they'll probably sound really off to the person that's actually talking. But that's me. That's not the person. The person actually doesn't really sound like they may be underwater when they're talking. But I think they're understandable enough for this, and I put together a transcript for the episode, which will be on the Three Geeks site. Mm-hmm. And so, feel free, if you don't quite catch something, look at the Three Geeks in a Law blog page for the episode, and you can catch that part of the answer. We have 17 attendees who were gracious enough to talk to us, or talk to you.
I should note that some of the interviews were actually from the is it Practical AI?
Oh yeah, there were a few of those. Yeah.
Let me do that again. I should note that some of the interviews, a few of the interviews, are from the Practical AI conference that both of us also attended in December, and so was able to get to speak with some people there. That was also a great conference. I just thought very well curated. The topics were spot on, and really not a whole lot of overlap. And everybody really knew their stuff. So
yeah, and I was invited to that one. So,
yeah. So,
so the idea behind this episode is we're going to go through and listen to the guests to the interviews. Some of these range from just 30 seconds or less, and some, but I don't think we have any that are over like a minute.
Hours.
And a half. Yeah, there's no long ones. These are short answers, and we kind of ask them to project is a variation of our crystal ball question, but really kind of project to see what they think 2024 is going to bring to the legal industry. So,
Absolutely.
Marlene, anything else you want to do before we queue up Paul Paul Gudaitis?
I think we should learn how to pronounce his name first.
Well,
We're doing the best we can. We're just doing the best we can, folks. So, yes, I think we're all set to go.
all right. Well, like I said, first up is Paul.
Okay.
I'm Paul Gudaitis, founder and CEO of Origami. Well, I think with the explosion of Gen AI technology and LLM-based models, what we're going to see over the next year is that delivery of legal work is going to become increasingly automated and eventually somewhat commoditized. And so I think what we're going to see is firms doubling down on focusing on business of law applications in AI in addition to just practice of law applications. So they're going to be using analytics to help improve the health of their client relationships, improve growth strategies, and improve client retention.
All right. Well, that was Paul. Paul's with Origami. I mean, I think that's a
I don't
pretty safe
disagree.
bet. That's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah.
No, I think
I agree.
I did want to dive in on one of the things that he talked about, and that was they're going to double down on focusing on business of law applications, and I think what we're hearing there is more of the back office stuff that we're seeing, not necessarily billable hour work, but rather the things that support the billable hour work, which makes total sense. In fact, if people ask me, you know, how is it that a firm should start with AI? The first thing I tell them is what not to do. And I was like, don't go after the billable hour right off the bat. Look at the things that are in the back office, marketing, library, finance, any of the recruiting, any of those, business development. That's probably where you're going to get the biggest appetite and get people to want to do more.
Yeah. I mean, already seeing, AI sort of helping with like the writing of, various business development documents, and we're already seeing it in the research space. One kind of practical thing I'll note is when he's talking about data analytics, and I'm just thinking analytics in general. I think there's still some work to be done there. I mean, some of these Gen AI models still don't do well with tables, and they don't always do well with numbers. So that I think is going to be a bit of a hurdle. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year with that.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. That it's not just the generative AI that's going to be going. So, do you want to talk about our next speaker next?
Yeah, Andrew. All right, you're going to cut this now. Andrew Medeiros, who's the director of innovation at Troutman Pepper, and Andrew has a slightly different take on sort of whether we should all be rushing into Gen AI.
Yeah, Andrew Adair. I am the Director of Innovation at Troutman Pepper. I think we should be preparing to take our time. We need to walk before we run. I know it's weird as someone at a conference like this talking about everything that we've done already, but we try to be cautious as we can. Try to take our time. Walking is not staying still, but we have to, really evaluate the market, be thoughtful about the solutions that we onboard, and the solutions that we offer to our attorneys.
Thoughts on that one?
Yes.
I have thoughts.
I have thoughts. I have many thoughts. I think he's right. I think you do have to be cautious. I think firms need to be cautious. I mean, clearly we have a lot of ethical responsibilities to our clients and their data. And so, we shouldn't be running kind of headlong into some of this new technology without, doing our due diligence. That said, Well, I'll back up.
I knew there was a
And you
but
should,
coming in.
but obviously, every organization is different. Like you have to be comfortable. So, you have to do this when, from a, a firm organization perspective, you're comfortable. But, that said, and I know we've talked about this before, and this is happening. And so you really do have to kind of have your toe in the water at least to, just to sort of stay, to stay afloat in terms of how fast this stuff is moving. Like, you want to be involved. You want to be, trying this stuff out. You want to be thinking of opportunities, because, you can't just sort of wait until, I don't think in this situation you can wait until everything is safe and done,
Yeah.
because that's already too late.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think he kind of put a disclaimer in there in that walking is not
He did.
standing still. So it's not that we're doing nothing,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I think he is right. We need to make sure that we have problems to solve and not just solutions looking for those problems, which
It,
I think a lot of people are already jumping the gun on that. So I think that approach is probably perfect, but I be careful walking when everyone else is jogging and running, and not get too far behind on it. Which I think that's what he means, is that it's keeping pace with everyone else, but not necessarily jumping in and making foolish decisions just because you want to do something in order to be doing something. So
right. So position 2 on the Peloton bike.
what's that? Position two.
Position.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Oh man! Speaking of which, I need to get back on mine. So, all right. Next up is Justin Helms from Hush Blackwell.
Hey, Justin Hill. Hutch Blackwell, Artificial Intelligence Solution Strategist. I would say leveraging AI in automated workflows. So taking apart documents, putting them into specific attributes, quality checking that, and then building whatever generative information from there automatically. That's going to be a huge win for everybody.
Yeah, and on this, I think this touches a little bit of what we heard earlier from Paul, which was talking about I think there's layering of AI that we're going to see in 2024 that we didn't necessarily see in 2023. And that is, we're going to have databases, we're going to have structured and unstructured information, we're going to have machine learning, we're going to have natural language processing, data extraction, and then generative AI. I think I think a lot of people right now, especially those that may not be as savvy on the generative AI and the rest of the AI front, thinks that ChatGPT is the do all to end all, and what we're going to see is this layering and putting things in the appropriate layer to organize the data, retrieve the data, and then be able to generate the content that we're looking for.
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier before we started recording that, there's some solutions that are going to have to be sort of highly specific and structured, and then there's going to be, other situations where, it doesn't have to be. It could be more creative. And so, you are going to see different opportunities, and it's going to be great, I think, for innovation professionals, for KM professionals, for any professionals that are kind of touching this space, because it sort of revives interest in some of the tools that we already have, right? That may not have Gen AI components, but we're going to be, very, very useful to people. But this whole sort of, interest in Gen AI, you can sort of direct people in the right direction. And the other thing is sort of connecting Gen AI with sort of existing processes, and you're already starting to see that a little bit, like the automation, for example. sort of writing code to, get certain sort of documentation in there and then have an automated prompt to do something and then getting a result.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, next up, get everyone strap in because we're going to get a little geeky, I think. So.
Okay. Melina Higgins is up next.
Hi, I'm Helena Higgins, Chief Technology Officer for Cloudport. We are a legal tech startup in the testimony and how is it? Something that's been in my mind that I have at TS people talk about a lot, which I think will emerge next year, is things of synthetic data in legal. Because we've so far been using publicly available data, but there's so much more that we can be doing, but the data is not. It's client data. Clients don't want us to use that data. We need synthetic data, which other industries don't. Tell me a little bit more about synthetic data. Yeah, the concept is, so in industries like banking, for example, you don't want to use people's real social security numbers or credit cards or their names. So to train those models, they basically fake the data. It's the same way, you may need exactly. So we will need to, as an industry, think about coming up with the equivalent of that for our industry. Like, for example, my company deals with depositions. There are very few publicly available depositions to train models. So, I'm exploring all the different ways I could create synthetic data.
Yeah, that one was a little harder to hear, but basically she was saying synthetic data in order to train the models because clients and there may be sensitive data that we don't want to be using to train either the large language models or even deep learning, things like that. So interesting. So what's your thoughts on using synthetic data?
Oh, she's spot on. And we had a good conversation about this. And, it kind of gets me wondering, it's like, can we use Gen I to kind of create synthetic examples? Because, this comes up often where, say there is a tool that you want to try out or you want to, you want to do a trial of this thing. Where, what types of data are you going to use? You can use dummy data, you can use anonymized data, but again, you have to figure whatever your firm allows on that. And I know, that's a big question as to what to be able to use and what's okay. And we also run into the problem, Greg, you totally know this, is that when attorneys are testing things out, it's got to be, they always want it to be their data, because if it's different than what they use, they're just like, well, that's not what I use. That's not, I can't make a decision based on that. So if we can have synthetic data that is as close as possible, but yet not, the actual data that's used in the firm, that to me is just a lifesaver because it would just allow us to look at things, much more quickly and test things much more quickly.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, and everyone forgive me because this is just coming right off the top of my head. But imagine that you would be able to take your financial data, your client information, maybe even the emails that come in from your clients, and be able to essentially strip all the proper nouns out of that to remove a lot of the key information that would track that data back to the client. And then you would have an encoder decoder type thing with your system so that the models are trained on synthetic data, but you could pass it through a decoder and the information that you're getting back is actually real data that you have. Maybe that's too far-fetched, but I don't know if anyone wants to go into business with that. Give me a call. All right. So the next one we had was actually I couldn't do anything with it, and so I apologize, but we could not get it.
To FX Ledoux.
Yeah, FX
I
Ludo.
think, yeah,
So yeah,
we do.
sorry
We
about that.
apologize.
We
I'll
will
reach out.
try
Sorry.
again another time. But next up is Adam Stefosky. So let's hear what Adam had to say.
It's Stofsky.
Stofsky, Adam Stofsky.
Stofsky.
Well, he'll tell us here in a second.
He'll tell us who he is.
Adam Stopke.
There we go.
I'm the founder and CEO of Briefly, for a legal content and legal information startup. Yeah, so Briefly's mission is to make legal information more accessible to everyone. I think what we're doing is sort of solving this global problem of the fact that lawyers are not trained in communications like at all. I think, also I don't think I had a second of training, but like we're communicators, right? That's what we're supposed to do. And I feel like law schools kind of fuck that out of us as we learn to talk to judges and other lawyers. That is a huge problem. It's a huge problem for the community at large, for businesses, that people don't know much about law and lawyers don't know how to communicate about it. So there's a ton of kind of hidden value being lost because of it. So we're kind of on that side of becoming the world's best legal content creators. Now, good question. My suspicion is, now I'm not hackathon 12 years, something like that. So maybe I'm not the very best person to know the answer to this, but my suspicion is, from talking to legal tech companies, lawyers in all sectors, from legal aid to in-house to firms, I think things are going to change a lot less than people think they're going to change in 2024. The billable hour is still going to be with us. Big firms are still going to be really expensive, and how teams are going to be growing. I think we'll see some changes at the margin, but I think the basic types of law, I don't think this is going to be the year for dramatic change, but it's going to come over time. That's my prediction. And our company Briefly, we're kind of leaning heavily into doing, right? And we're using AI for certain things, but our bet is that at the end of the day, people want to hear great storytelling. They want to hear from charismatic people explaining things in a clear, engaging way, and that's going to be true hopefully forever and ever.
Well, there's
Thank you.
still room for people, even with AI.
There's still room for people. Relationships are important.
Yeah.
The communication part was interesting. I feel like, well, we probably should be training people in communication earlier than than law school. We should be doing that in public schools, probably a little bit better. But that's a whole other problem to unwrap. While he was talking about this, I was thinking about actually Josh Kubecki, who just recently did a totally generated AI video of himself. And I thought, well, that's interesting compared to what we're talking about here. It's like maybe you use Gen AI to become a better communicator if you're really bad.
Yeah. If you're a huge
horrible
introvert,
thought.
you can create this artificial intelligence video version of yourself to communicate with your clients. I want to attack the communication from another angle, which I think 2024 is actually going to help people with. And part of the communication problem is there's just so much going on. There you get, I literally get hundreds of emails every day, and being able to cut through that, know about when your meetings are, when you should have time to yourself, when you should pick up the phone and call your client. But I think as you see the Copilot integration with Microsoft Office 365, I think there's going to be some of that to help you manage your time better and to give you the prompts for the human to know when it's time to, put the emails down and pick up the phone. And so I'm hoping maybe the artificial intelligence and that co-pilot types of functionality where we're using AI as basically an assistant will help improve the human part of us. So maybe that's what we see in 2024.
And I'll take it from a different angle. Like, relationships and communication are clearly going to be critical, particularly since all of this is so new and people don't really kind of know what to expect. They don't actually know how to use it because it is so broad. I mean, I've gotten questions about like, look, I want to get involved, but I don't know if what I want to do works in here. I'm not really sure how to do it. So I think, developing those sort of relationships of trust, being clear in your communication in terms of, what to do, what not to do, what works, what doesn't work, and sort of guiding people, I think is going to be huge. And the other point I want to raise is that yes, the billable hour isn't going to go away next year, and yes, things are going to still be expensive. I think I read the other day that what was like, I don't know if it was the average but it was the quote was like $2,400 an hour for billing, and I'm like, wow, that's incredible.
Do you
So
remember when they
yeah,
were
I mean,
reluctant to go above $1,000 an hour? Wow.
so yeah, you're gonna see that happening. He's absolutely right on that. So
All right.
all right, what do we got up next?
We've got Stephanie Curcio is up next.
Curcio.
Gonna talk about some IP and AI. So
My name is Stephanie Curcio. I am the CEO and co-founder of NL Patent. NL Patent is a AI-based patent search and analytics platform. So we have completely changed the way that people interact with patent data. Historically, you would search through patent data using keywords, which sounds easy until you actually read a patent. Patents are very complicated. They make no sense. You would never describe a simple thing using the words you would normally use to describe that thing. Instead, you would create many words and sometimes make up words to describe something, which makes them very difficult to search. So our AI system allows you just to describe that thing in plain English, and our system will automatically search hundreds of millions of patents and generate a list of patent documents that are actually similar to that thing. The results are instant. They're iterative, so the system will learn from you as you interact with the data, and it is often seen to outperform human experts on speed, of course, and accuracy. I think 2024 is going to be the year of IP. So we've seen a lot of developments in contract review, contract generation, document review. All of these things have been tackled over the course of the last 10 years. IP is a little bit untouched. So the technology that we're using is pretty new. What we are doing was only possible in the last couple of years. And this seismic change in the technology has created a lot of new workflows that were never previously possible. So the IP system is going to be a lot more accessible. IP attorneys are going to be way more efficient at their jobs, but the IP process will also be democratized in a lot of ways. So people that were never able to access patent data can now do so quite easily using the technology that's being developed. That's brand spanking new.
brand spanking new technology. I like that.
Brand spanking new. So Stephanie actually was one of the finalists at the TLTF, and I hope that we can get her on the podcast to do a little bit more in-depth discussion about the tool and what she's doing. Because if you can describe something in plain English on a patent search, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's
really
a big deal. And I think that's one of the things, and I think this is why people were so excited in the legal industry, because this is a industry that's based on language, that words matter. And the way people say and write things, it could be very unique. And so if you can find a way to normalize human language, just like we do databases, it's really going to open up a lot of opportunities for vendors. It's like she said, it's going to democratize the law itself, because no longer is the whatever it is you created is behind this kind of crystal palace of words that you've created to keep people out. They're going to be able to understand even the most complicated legalese and be able to get that back in plain English. And that truly is a game changer.
Yeah, and it's going to be not just experts that are able to sort of do this type of research. It's going to be any, I won't say anybody, but it's going to be people who can just say something in plain English and find the answer.
Well, next up, did you record Dan at the AI conference or at TLTF? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the New York conference. I think.
Okay. Well, here's
remember.
Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Katz, professor of law at Chicago Tech College of Law, and also co-founder of P73 Venture.
Well, I think what we've seen is the first wave of large language models like GPT-4 and what have you being sort of brought into the work streams that lawyers work in just, various different areas. But we really haven't seen, and we're going to see more of it, real engineering built on top of these things. A lot of what's been done is kind of relatively thin layers on top of these base capabilities. And that's some pretty serious stuff coming down the pipe over the next 12 months. I'm looking forward to it. To see you all there.
Dan is
it
already in
was
the
in Florida.
future.
It was Florida.
Okay.
I'm thinking back, and it's like, yeah, it was a TLTF.
Yeah, because Dan and you and I were on a panel at the AI conference, and so we got a little bit more insight on what Dan was talking about here, and I think he's looking at these kind of multi-level LLMs over time to where you're not just relying upon one single source, but rather
Right.
a large layer of sources to do that. Because one of the things he said at the conference in New York was there's only one internet, and once you copy the internet, where do you go from there? We heard earlier maybe it's synthetic data. I don't know that's what Dan was thinking, but maybe it is. But the improvements are going to come over the next 12 months, and so I think a lot of things that you see as limitations now are going to be breakthroughs as Dan sees them in this year.
Yeah, I mean, he was sort of giving the timeline of sort of how stuff started and sort of where we're at and where we're moving, and like you said, he was talking about how we started with sort of these large language models, but now we're sort of moving more into these smaller models that are sort of very specific and handle very specific type of, have a very specific type of output, a very specific type of task, and then kind of having an overlay where, you can, ask your question and, ask your prompt and then be directed to whatever is appropriate to ask that and, or to answer that rather. And I think you're actually seeing that in some of the vendors that we've actually talked to recently on the podcast as well. That they're starting to experiment with that.
Yeah. Dan's got his fingers on the pulse, I think, and so keep
there.
looking at what he's doing and what they're doing at 273 Ventures. So next up is Farrah Pepper from Marsh McLennan.
Hi, this is Sarah Pepper, Chief Legal Innovation Counsel at Marsh McLennan. My role within the Marsh McLennan Legal Department is focused on legal innovation and technology. So we take a fresh look at how our legal team works and find ways to turbocharge it. Might be tech, might be process, and we'd love to make people's days better. So an essential part of our platform is finding the joy for our colleagues and what they're doing. Well, we'd be remiss talking about 2024 and not talking about Gen AI. It is the hot topic right now, and you can expect a lot more dialogue within legal teams about what the good and appropriate uses of Gen AI are in our existing workflows. But I like to go back to basics. I think that Gen AI and all the hype around it, much of which is real, has reopened people's hearts and minds to all different kinds of technology. So we're kind of doing some back to basics, looking at point solutions and problems that we've got, and finding that colleagues are just so receptive right now to the idea of taking some tech and injecting it into our workflows. Today at TLTF, we talked about litigation, but it's really across all the different practice areas that we're finding this renewed enthusiasm in 2024 at looking at tech.
I don't know if Farah has a podcast, but she's got a great voice for podcasting. So even
I've
after I had to
I've
clean up the recording.
basically it's like if I could present like Farah, my life would probably be pretty complete. So shout out to her. Also shout out to her. This is a little aside. Dan was doing his keynote and was talking about some of the problems with not citing sources, because at the time we had yet another attorney who was trying to put something out and didn't check the sources and it was fake. And
Was his last name Schwartz again?
Maybe. So I think so. So Dan was like, I feel a little bit bad for the guy. And like after the presentation fair, I was like, we should feel bad for that guy. And I'm thinking to myself, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I don't feel bad for that guy. It's like he knows what he needs to do. So I thought that was great.
Yeah.
I think, Farah has her finger on the pulse that, colleagues are really receptive right now. And so let's take advantage of that. And, keep it real, keep it honest, make sure, kind of going back to being clear communicators and having good relationships about, making sure that people understand for sure what it can and can't do. I also love that her program, or her panel rather, was on litigation, because I personally am finding that more challenging to get people excited about. So I am hoping, and as a former litigator, I'm like, I want to get my peeps on board. So hoping that there's more in 2024 there.
Yeah, and that's been one of the things I think we've said a lot on the show is it's good because you've got this excitement, and take advantage of that and redirect them toward the proper way to solve their problems, even if that isn't what they're envisioning how their problem should be solved with Chat GPT. So next up is Brad Blickstein. I think this one I cleaned it up as best I can, but you may want to read along on the transcript with this one. Yeah.
Blickstein, partner and head of the new law practice group at Burris and Brunel. There's a lot of talk about large language models, other GPT-like functions, generative AI, have creating legal work, creating legal documents, but there's a ton of potential value there around the building of technology. The developers I talk to say that their work is 80% faster because they can use generative AI to build tools. I think we're going to start seeing faster building of tools, take it in law firms and legal tech, and just figure out how to use generative AI to build the very tools that we need. So first of all, if you're using generative AI to do legal work, just don't every hour, just constantly. What are you going to do? Take an hour's worth of work and do it in 2 minutes and bill for 2 minutes? It doesn't take from you. The wrong sort of system about all this complexity is that law firms will realize that they are leaving money on the table by not building tech solutions that roll in and out via a model other than the hourly bill. And rather than flying things to law firms, we would like flat fees, which I think we've seen over the last 50 years doesn't really work. Hence data we start seeing law firms say we can make more money with other models because the hourly bill you don't didn't pop in a lot.
Yeah, so sorry about the cleanup on that one, Brad.
Let's summarize that one.
Yeah, so I think just to summarize that he's thinking that he's seeing reports where people are working 80% faster using the combination of human input and generative AI. And there's a good Boston, what's the
industry?
Boston something group. Boston Consulting Group, where it talked about they gave people a task, and when it was a creative task, like what's a great new tool to go to market with, they worked something like 44% faster coming up with those ideas. But when you ask them to answer a business question, they actually fell 23% below those that weren't using the generative AI tools. So yes, the Gen AI tools, when used right, can speed up things. So, and then Brad was saying, well, if we're speeding up the billable work, and you can do something in 2 minutes that used to take, an hour, it doesn't make sense to continue with the business model that we're doing, and that law firms see that they're leaving things on the, leaving money on the table, and that they'll be kind of pushed into a different business model other than just straight billable hour work. So that hopefully recapped what Brad was saying.
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
You did a very good job recapping that. And I am definitely in Brad's camp. I would love to see, a new model other than the billable hour that really takes hold, because that just, first of all, it's efficiency is the right thing to do. And secondly, I really think it gives a whole lot of opportunity for, those of us on the business side of the house in law firms to really get people engaged with some of these tools, because there's an incentive to use them then, as opposed to an incentive against them.
Yeah. So I think that's right. I think this is going to disrupt the industry. So we'll see how we adjust to that. So next up is Brian Shearer. Oh, you got something else?
Oh, I was going to say next up. You've been saying next up a few times.
Oh, sorry. I'll let you do it this time.
It's okay. Okay. Next up is Brian Shearer from Hay Counsel.
Brian Shearer. I am the founder of a company called A Counsel, and I am from San Diego, California. So the product in its current manifestation matches early stage startups with lawyers who are independent or small firm lawyers, and so they're able to offer more affordable rates and more kind of a hands-on experience. And in the future, the very near future, we're building out a whole type of support structure for lawyers who are practicing independently. So that includes a community, which we already have stood up. But in addition to that, it has just support services like helping them with back-end admin, bookkeeping, setting up their own technology, all that stuff. And then some content, events, all the things that lawyers normally experience on the inside a law firm, but now that they're practicing independently, they don't have. So we're working on it.
I feel like if I say AI, you're going to have a lot of hate and answer. Yeah, so
I think within that category, I think it's important to focus on how AI is going to hopefully reduce the cost of legal services. I think that means whether it's lawyers being able to work faster or lawyers being able to work more independently, like through a platform like ours. I think that's at least what I'll be watching. Like, when do we start to see the hourly rates that are continuing to go up, start to go down?
So Marlene, what's your bet? Billable rates and legal costs going to go up or down this year? It's a trick question.
They're going to go up. I know.
Yeah.
So I really liked this product. It's more for the small practitioner, small firms, solo practitioners who, can't always get the same sort of support structure that you can in a large firm. That's one of the benefits, one of the draws of being at big law, is that, you have a lot of these services and things available to you that, is not something you do, when you're solo. And, Brian and his company, that's what they're doing. They're sort of helping them with all of the, the admin and sort of non-legal practice stuff that, can really take a lot of time so that practitioners can practice. And I think there's really a market for that. I'm eager to see what happens with Hay Counsel.
Yeah, and I think his overall vision may eventually come to fruition. But this is a big industry that's set in its ways, and even with all the excitement with the technology, changing the business structure and reducing cost, I think that's a longer term goal. But again, I hope it comes through.
Yeah, we'll come back in a year, see what happens. So Kathy Shu, you say it. What is it?
I'm going to say Shu, but she's going to tell us how it's really said.
All right,
Okay,
well,
my
then-
name is Kathy Zhu, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Streamline AI. So Streamline is the legal front door for in-house legal teams. We help legal teams work much more effectively and efficiently with the business. We collect all of the requests from the business in the tools that they're currently using and that they love, so there's no change management, and we convert that into requests in Streamline. We apply workflow automation to route it to where it needs to go. We have an audit trail, their reporting and metrics as well, and a dashboard, so the GC has everything they need to make data-driven decisions. Yeah, so we have several really exciting AI features that we're releasing next year that we're really, really thrilled about. So a lot of product development is coming your way next year. So we're actually focused on in-house legal teams rather than law firms. And for in-house legal, what's really critical to solve right now is a process problem. So I think a lot of attention and focus has been on document management, CLMs, and document problems, but that means that there's still a massive hole when it comes to process. Legal teams desperately need better metrics, better reporting to run more efficiently and to also advocate for legal value within the business.
Yeah, change management and process. I think AI can help with both of those.
So Kathy was also one of the finalists at the TLTF, and people were very, very excited about this tool. There was a lot of buzz, a lot of talk about it. And
What was the part that people were excited about?
Well, I will tell you, like, literally, I saw some guy come up to her and he was like, thank God. He goes, you don't understand. I'm just like deluged with like emails every day from every business department saying, help me with this, help me with that. And like, I don't know. I can't manage all of them. I mean, literally, he was like overjoyed. And so, I mean, this, unlike some of the ones we've talked about before, this is specifically for, in-house legal teams, and that's how she's marketing it. And so I think, there's clearly a need because there was such a reaction, and she's talking about the process. Like, I mean, these in-house legal teams, particularly for large companies, like they're responsive to all the different departments and they have to juggle all of this. And I'm sure, my guess is that each of those different departments have a different way of doing things. And, your legal team has to kind of figure this stuff out and they have to turn it around really fast. So, hey, I need to understand what this contract says. And, you have to turn that around quickly. So yeah, AI could certainly help with that. If you have templates where you can extract stuff and you can summarize stuff using Gen AI, yeah, that would be great. They could turn around and say something right away. And, we've talked about it before, bad process is bad process. So if there's something that can streamline that and make it more consistent, that's got to be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard to scale bad processes. So.
But I like what she's saying. It's like, basically it overlays, like no one has to change. So, I mean, I haven't seen this thing in action, but if nobody has to change, that's got something going for it.
Yeah, I did not see that, but when I hear that, red flags go up in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like no one has to change. We'll see. So
okay.
But like I said, I did not see the product. So next up is Cheryl Wilson Griffin.
Just going. Okay. Hi, Cheryl Wilson Griffin here, CEO of Legal Tech Consultants. I'm here at the Legal Tech Fund Summit in Miami.
And excited for 2024, I think, because it's the golden age of legal tech. That's what I'm going to call it. We are going to see new combinations of data, both internal and external, brought on not just by AI, but by increased interoperability, APIs, better innovation, faster innovation, all those types of things. And I think we'll see a marrying of the internal and external data at law firms in a way that benefits clients we've never seen before or really never anticipated.
Yeah, now she's singing my song on this, and this is something that I've been talking about for 25 years. Is you have to be able to marry the external information and the internal information, and make the result better than the two individual pieces. And so I think again, and you notice that she said this is not an AI only issue. Mm-hmm. This you're talking about interoperability.
Yep.
Woo.
Say it again 3 times fast.
Better innovation. I couldn't even say it one time. Slow. So and marrying these internal external data points, is the dream.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. Last year, if it wasn't for AI, I thought all we were going to be talking about was APIs. Unfortunately, that kind of got pushed to the background. But I think it's you got to have that in order to have that the ability to combine all of that, all the valuable information that you have, and all the valuable information that's available.
Yeah, we still have to figure out the best way to get the information and to and to decide which information is important. Like, I mean, this is all kind of before what she's talking about. Like, what's the best way to get it to us and digest it, and then what do we actually care about? And because it's so easy to just get like a ton of data, both internally or externally, and then it's like, okay, what do I do with this? And I see questions about that. It's like, again, I have all this stuff, and is it in the right format? Can it be integrated? These sort of niggling detail questions that need to be answered before you can actually, sort of get to where she's going on this. So, but she's absolutely right. Next up, we have Adam Miller.
Ready for some Web3 discussions, Marlene?
Yeah.
My name is Adam Miller. I'm a co-founder of MyDAO, which stands for Marshall Islands DAO, and we're building the best legal framework in the world for Web3 and DAOs. I'm also the host of the Just DAO It podcast for people starting DAOs. Sure, so DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which makes it sound even more confusing than it is. It's every organization, so it could be a business, a charity, an association, any type of organization that wants to use the blockchain to track its ownership or its membership, to do governance like voting on chain, and also to keep your money on chain rather than in a bank account. And so by doing all this stuff on the blockchain, you get insured compliance, you get transparency, you can run and scale organizations much faster and easier than you can using traditional legal documents, for example, to keep a company organized. So, today I would say probably about 5% of people have heard of DAOs. I think by the end of 2024, 50% of people have that target, yeah. And that's true pretty much all over the world. I mean, DAOs, if you go back about a year, there were probably about 10,000 DAOs. Now there's about 50,000 DAOs. By the end of 2024, there could be hundreds of thousands of DAOs. And by that point in time, I think most people will have heard of them. And probably, as long as the bull market does return in 2024, which seems possible, maybe even likely, people are going to be interested in finding, like, what's that next big crypto thing? DAOs are going to be one of those next big crypto things. And so I think a lot of people will be looking for DAOs to join, either for fun or to speculate or for whatever reason.
Yeah. Had you've heard of DAOs before? Had you not, Marlene?
I will admit, when I was talking to him, I was like, I have not heard of this before. And so we had, a very nice conversation about what it is. So. Yeah.
Then Chad Main at the Technically Legal podcast had a guest on a few weeks ago that talked about DAOs again. Let me make sure I got that right, because I think I think we may have been talking when you.
I'm making
said-
corrections to our transcript right now because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm looking at this. It's like it didn't
That's
recognize
not
DAO.
DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And you're seeing this in crypto, like even today, I saw a news feature where one of the crypto coins called 1inch is now setting up a DAO as part of that crypto currency. So really interesting. I still, even after listening to Chad's podcast and reading a little bit on it, still a little bit behind. But remember, folks, if this is the first time you heard about DAOs, then you heard it here on the Geek and Review.
Next person up is Andrea Markstrom, who is the CEO for Schulte, Roth and Zabel and a good friend of the podcast.
Yeah, good to have her on here.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Andrea Markstrom, Chief Information Officer for Schulte, Roth and Zabel. Excited to be here at the Legal Tech Summit and, the opportunity to meet some amazing legal tech startups. So thank you for having us. There is so much opportunity to not only, do some great things internally within firms, but also to bring your clients in, introduce them to not only new technologies, new tools, but also to raise the bar in terms of how we deliver service. So I think that's a huge opportunity for everyone in 2024. And then the other thing I think we should focus on is just outside of service for our firms and for our clients, is how can we bring AI or technology for good and give back to our community? And that's a huge opportunity, I think, that we can all come together as an industry and do in 2024.
Yeah, Andrea is always looking at how can we do good? How can we make not just our business better, but how can we make society,
how can we just do better,
the community better and do better? So I really appreciate that approach to it. And I did want to say one thing is, and we've been talking for months, damn near a year now, about how we should be able to leverage the excitement for generative AI within our law firms to find real solutions, even if that means not AI. Lawyers should also leverage this with their clients. Their clients are looking for innovative ways to approach their business problems. And that's one of the things you hear is companies don't have legal problems, they have business problems that they need you to solve. And I think if you are a lawyer and you're not taking advantage of the excitement and the expectation that your clients are having, you're missing a big opportunity.
Yeah, Andrea. Pod dog.
Pod dog made an appearance.
We're going to try that again.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't be a good show if Pod Dog didn't make an appearance.
It's true. So, she's just guarded me from everything. But Andrea is always an inspiration to me. Every time I sort of get down in the weeds, and down in the doldrums, she says things like this and reminds me about like the good that, we do and can do as an industry. And, then my heart feels good again. So thanks, Andrea, for that. And, I like that she highlights that, what this conference is about, because it's not, I don't know that it's super well known, but you can learn, but you can also bring, you can bring your clients to learn, you can bring your, firm leaders to learn, and to connect with this community. So, she really highlighted kind of what's, the importance of a conference like this. And, I was glad that she said that, because, I think that's something others need to know.
Yeah. I think we're going to kind of dovetail that. In fact, I kind of moved the arrangement around a little bit so that Bill Henderson,
you did,
which I think
a
lot
that.
of people No, and so I think this kind of dovetails nicely with what we just heard from Andrea.
He was the first person
My name
that
is
I
Bill
interviewed.
Adderson.
Yeah.
My name is Bill Adderson. I'm a professor of law at Indiana University Maurer School of Law and also the editor of Legal Evolution. Well, I'm here at the Legal Tech Fund Summit in Miami, Florida, and I can tell you for sure that anything related to business to business or lawyer to lawyer enterprise stuff here is well taken care of by the venture capitalist. I'm particularly interested in things that are related to access to justice, though, and so I'm looking for stuff that might be on the horizon that would be related to use of generative AI and access to justice things for people law. So that's what I'm hoping to find here, because that's really what I want to focus. I saw an absolutely amazing presentation by the woman from the Second Chance Initiative, which is an organization that is passing legislation for expungement, automatic expungement that spends half in 12 states, and then there's ancillary services and tax leaking to do this, get people touching samples. I was just absolutely amazed and blown away. The entrepreneur that did this one had this experience. He was convicted of a very low-level crime, but it traveled through her, interfered with their ability to get a job, to get rental housing, to suspend your kids' schooling, and how to raise $75 billion to pass. It's a nonprofit to pass. So I was absolutely amazed by that. So I'm really interested in that. So that was my inspiration story. If I go home and only learning about that, all about a backstory, this conference will more than be worth it.
Yeah, Bill, I love Bill's enthusiasm on that and his
Yes.
focus on access to justice, which, you go back to the statistics, something like 80% of the people are underserved in the legal, in their legal needs here in the United States. And so, God, it just seems like AI is a great tool to help kind of narrow that down. Even if you chop off a few percentage points, it's a lot of people that would otherwise go unserved. So, and I think his example of the Second Chance Initiative and their work at expungements, so that people can get some of that albatross off of their necks, and move on with their life without forever being punished for something that in the great scheme of things probably may not matter in what they need to do today.
Yeah, so I think Bill highlighted again another aspect of the TLTF summit, is that there was this focus on access justice. I did see this presentation, and I mean, there were tears in the audience, and some of them were mine. It was very moving. It was very moving, and just really incredible what they've been able to do. And I do hope that we can get some representatives on for the future for the podcast. Another thing I'll highlight is again, sort of the giving back aspect of the summit. One of the evenings, one of the activities was like there was a number of local charities where you would participate. So you were like building bikes, or you were interacting with dogs for adoption. You were building different things, and so this is something that you could. All of us, a number of us basically were doing different ones. And that was sort of the key. That was like the key activity for the evening, which I thought was pretty cool and very different. So again, that just kind of goes back to what the conference does. And, I agree with Bill that again, I mean, if you could just sort of go away with that, then, you've gotten a lot out of the summit.
All right. Well, Marlene, are you ready for our last?
Our last
person?
One.
So this is Jacob Beckerman
Yes.
from macro.com.
From macro.com.
Jacob Beckerman. I run macro.com.
we make a document editor, basically a complete replacement for Word, Acrobat, Hair, AI-powered, and make it easy to edit, redline, and review documents in one place. So I think we had a massive AI revolution in 2022, but it actually does take a while still to productize those things. So continued productization of all of the advancements, building those in thoughtful ways, products that people can actually use. I think the first wave was a little bit of useful, but sort of like party trick, and hopefully next year we'll get really useful software will use Bandit.
So a lot of
Party tricks.
party
Wow.
tricks this year, novelties, party tricks, cigars. Yeah, we're joking, but I think he's right. I think we saw a lot of things that looked good, but if you scratched at the surface a little bit, was essentially a wrapper on some tools that may change over time and make this initial product completely obsolete in a matter of days. So what do you see? Do you think we're ready to go beyond party tricks?
It was funny, like I was listening just now and I heard party tricks and I immediately, I don't know why this came to mind, but I thought of Fred and George from Harry Potter. And what
Yes.
is it? What is it? Is it Zonk's Emporium or something that they run with the different jokes? So I think I get what he's saying. I mean, think about it. When we started out, like we were talking about, like, hey, it can write you a birthday poem or a song, or it can do all of your headshot pictures, or have you in picture of you in some weird universe and stuff. And so it was like fun, but sort of useful, but not super useful.
Right.
But I do think we move very rapidly into areas where, in fact, it was and is useful. And, is that kind of the detail, highly specific type of legal work? Maybe, editing of documents, if it's got to be really, tight? No, probably not. But, when we're talking about initial drafts, emails, emails with feeling, those types of things, it does do, and does pretty well. Like summarizing things, it does. So I think this year is going to be a lot more exploration. I mean, for organizations that are using it, taking a look at what people are using it for, kind of running those tests, seeing if those are valuable use cases, and marketing that further, because there's going to be a million different ways people use these things. It's just a question of from an organizational perspective, what are you going to promote that's going to have a business impact?
Yeah, I think people are beyond the the awe and shock that we initially saw in 2023, and now it's going to be where's the beef? Where is the actual thing that is going to actually change the way that I practice law, or I write documents, or review documents, or do my daily work.
I love that. Go ahead. Finish.
No. I know I get this. There's a reason I have gray hair, so I can make.
I love that you
old
combined
references.
an '80s reference with Gen AI. No, you get points for that. You definitely get points for that.
All right. Well, that was the end of the interviews that you did. Again, Marlene, thank you very much for going down there and talking with all these people. A lot of times people ask me what's the biggest benefit of having a podcast like this, is the fact that if it weren't for this, there really would be no good reason for us to go up and talk to 17, 18 different people and get their, quick opinions on something. So this gives us that opportunity to meet people beyond our sphere, and that, so thank you for exposing
and connect them, connect them, both connect guests with guests and connect guests with, other members of our firm.
Yep.
So, really quite a benefit.
Yeah, it sure is. So thank you very much. And again, thanks to the 18 different folks that talked to us, both at the AI conference in New York and at the TLTF Summit in Miami.
Yes, and thank you everybody who took the time to sit with me and do the interviews. Apologies for the sound. We live and learn, and I certainly have. So I will make sure that next time it's a better
next time
spot.
We'll have different problems. It'll just be different.
We'll have different problems, but we'll try and find a quiet corner someplace. And I want to say thank you to our audience for taking the time to listen to the Geek and Review podcast. We really do appreciate you taking the time to listen. We appreciate hearing from you and hearing how impactful this podcast is on all of you. So thank you for that. If you enjoy the show, share it with a colleague. We'd love to hear from you, so reach out to us on social media. I can be found on LinkedIn or on X at GayBauerM and on Threads at mGayBauer66.
And I can be reached on LinkedIn. And I think one of my resolutions for 2024 may be to finally just let go of X. We'll see. We'll see. I'm still on there at Glambert, but I'll also keep an eye out on Threads, and you can reach me there at GlambertPod.
So Threads and Instagram seem to be connected. Have you seen that?
Yeah, they are.
They are. So
yep.
There's that. I'm on X, but I'm not really I'm
I'm
still
more of a
there,
lurker
but I'm
now,
not really
a poster.
I'm not really doing anything. So
yeah.
And also want to say thank you to Jerry David DeSica, who is the creator of the music that you hear on the Geek and Review podcast. So thank you, Jerry.
He is someone we are not giving up on.
Absolutely not. No AI generated music.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, all.